Does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Consent to speak out of order for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As we face the crisis that COVID-19 has confronted us with, the House must do its duty in full and do so in a way that contributes to the safety and welfare of our people, not in a way that harms it. Members are advised there will be no votes expected in the House next week. Members are further advised that an updated 2020 legislative calendar will be released in the coming days. I expect conversations to continue on additional legislation addressing the COVID-19 and the legislation we passed honoring our heroes. In the event that an agreement is reached on a bipartisan or partisan bill, I don't know how an agreement could be on a partisan bill, but a bipartisan bill, then we will make sure that the House has 72 hours before they need to come back to vote on that legislation. I'm disappointed that Leader McConnell said, when asked about the next phase of the coronavirus reliefs, he said, I think that's a decision to be made a month from now. As we know, we have a lot of people in crisis. We see food lines that are very, very long. We see unemployment rising steeply. There are many people in this country that think waiting is not appropriate. I'm pleased the House has adopted a resolution to allow the committees to work remotely, Madam Chair. I expect to use the coming weeks to get our committees back up and running so they can begin having hearings and markups on critical legislation. As the gentleman, my friend Mr. Scalise knows, we have a number of must-pass bills that need to be addressed. The National Defense Authorization Act, the 12 appropriation bills, the Surface Transportation Bill, and the WRDA bill as well. As committees begin consideration of these bills, I'll be in touch with members about when they will be scheduled this summer. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield to the gentleman from Louisiana, the Minority Whip.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank my friend from Maryland for walking through those items. I first want to start by sharing and associate myself with the comments from my friend from Texas, Mr. Thornberry, about the loss of our dear friend Sam Johnson. Sam and I got to be close friends, and I can picture him sitting right over there by General Lafayette's painting in his scooter as he was voting and sharing stories with friends in his last few months when he served here with us with distinction for so long, and the conversations and just the understanding of a giant that we served with, someone who served our country, spent 7 years in the Hanoi Hilton, as we talked about. They never broke him. They probably broke every bone in his body trying, but he and those other brave men in that prison never once faltered in their love and dedication to our country and to their family. And he missed his wife. We know now he's with her and in a special place. And we're all better for having served with Sam Johnson. And he truly is missed and was a special friend. And I would yield to the gentleman on that.
I want to echo his comments, although the congressman, the patriot, the hero, did not always vote with me, nor I with him. We became good friends. And I shared with you and others in this body a deep respect for who he was as a person, a decent man, a patriotic man, a good man, and obviously, as you have pointed out, a very courageous man as well. Served many missions, shot down, imprisoned, but they did not break Sam Johnson, nor did they break the love he had for his country, and we honor the service he gave, and I thank the gentleman for his comments. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I want to thank the Speaker as well for leading that tribute, and I'm sure at some time in the future we will spend an appropriate amount of time here on the floor where colleagues can share those stories about someone that everybody ought to know. And we know we have some giants like John Lewis and Sam Johnson who we got to serve with. Sam left and now is no longer with us. John still is, and obviously he's going through his own battle, and we pray for John as well. But as we have our battles of the day politically, it's good to remember the special people that get to make up this body and become part of this great institution of which we have the honor to serve. And so I appreciate the speaker and the leader on allowing us to have that moment. And I think I'd yield to the gentleman on that, or the speaker on that.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. It's a sad day for us, but what a joy for all of us to have served with Sam Johnson, a bona fide American hero, to serve with him in the Congress. I appreciate that you mentioned him and John Lewis in the same sentence, because I had the privilege under John Larson set up a Heroes Night, a bipartisan Heroes Night, and we cross-roughed. I had the privilege of giving Sam the award that night as a true hero, and he was funny, and he always beamed when he talked about Shirley, and he loved Jenny and the children and his son Bob, but now he's with them, with Shirley and Bob. It is, this was a very special person. I was mentioning Distinguished Whip earlier that we were there when the room was named for him. We were there when his picture was on. He always wanted us all around him to celebrate the recognition that he received so that he could boast of his bipartisanship and his patriotism, which we all admired. I was mentioning to the Distinguished Whip that and Mr. Thornberry and others, that on one of those occasions he had a fellow prisoner of war there with him. And that bond is something so beyond anything we can imagine. Imagine the strength, the courage, the patriotism, just the faith in God that he had. So thank you for the opportunity to share some just personal comments about a really great man, always friendly, always smiling, always teasing about our political differences, but as always, just being a model of greatness to all of us. Thank you, Mr. Whip, and I yield back to our distinguished leader, Mr. Hoyer, who was a good friend of Sam Johnson, I know. Thank you.
And if anybody wants to have a good read, his book, Captive Warriors, tells the story of those years in the Hanoi Hilton, not only the unbreakable bond of those heroes that he served in that prison with, but also the unbreakable love between he and Shirley. And she never wavered from her love of him, 7 years removed, while some of that time she didn't even know if he was alive. And he loved her till the day she died and till the day he died, because he mourned her death every day since. And it was something for all of us to, again, as we have our daily battles here, just to know that the special kind of people that we get to serve with, and he was surely one. So, yield back.
Madam Speaker, as I said, what we are going to do over the next couple of weeks, we have adopted a rule. It allows the committees to meet even if they can't be here for health reasons, depending upon what the status is in D.C. and the Capitol, where it is around the country, including transportation. And the rule that we adopted provides that committees must have, in order to conduct virtual or hybrid hearings, a practice session, then 2 hearings before they go to a markup. So obviously, if we're going to work on this floor, we need product. And obviously, product comes from the committees. And so I am very hopeful that the committees will be getting up and running at top speed in many respects. And of course, the committee has been working so very hard. And the members have been working so very hard, in my view, on both sides of the aisle, as they've been home and talking to their hospitals, talking to their governors and their county commissioners and their local folks, their nursing home administrators, so many people that we've kept in touch with through these weeks to see what we could do to assist them with whatever they needed. But the committees will be getting up to speed. They'll be qualifying for having hearings, and I expect work product to be coming later this month, and we will be giving notice in the near term on a longer term schedule. But the House will not be in session next week. and we will be looking at how the committees are proceeding from that point on. And we will give, as I said, as we have in the past, 72 hours notice to members when and if we have to come back. And I would again say also that we are very hopeful that our Republican colleagues will engage in the matters that were included in the HEROES bill, because our states are struggling. I know my state is a relatively wealthy state, but its revenues are off 20 to 25%. I don't know what Louisiana's position is, but I'm sure they're struggling as well. Municipalities are struggling, cities are struggling, counties are struggling of the revenue reduction, which is a direct result of COVID-19. And so we're trying to help those states. In addition, of course, we invested substantial sums in testing, isolating, tracing, treating individuals that have got COVID, and we need to follow up on who they've contacted so that we can make sure they isolate themselves, because the only way we're going to get a handle on this is to make sure we reduce the transmission from one to the other. And of course, we are all hopeful that we will develop, and there's money in there, develop a therapeutic to mitigate the adverse effects of COVID-19, but also a vaccine to protect us from getting COVID-19. But until that happens, we also need to give additional help to our small businesses and individuals who are really struggling as unemployment is at historic levels, over 38 million Americans. Maybe it's now closer to 40 million Americans without jobs. We've given them assistance. We need to give them some more. But that's where we stand now, and we will operate with the intent in mind of getting the business of the House done, in addition to the extraordinary work that we've done on 5 responses now from the House on the effects that the coronavirus has caused in this country, both to human beings' health and to the health of our economy. I yield to my friend.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. And when you look at the work that we've done together to help try to address the problems within our country, both economically, the health side, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses, state, local government, trillions of dollars that have already been spent. When you think just about the hundreds of billions of dollars that we've sent to states through various means, whether it's direct aid, the $150 billion package that we've sent to states. Each state got a large share of that money, billions of dollars in some cases for each state. I don't know of one state that has spent all of their allotment. Many are working to try to figure out if they're going to help local governments or not. It was surely our intention here that it wouldn't just be for states, that 45% of that money should be available for local governments as well. And I would urge governors to respect that intent of this body. But rather than continuing to look to Washington, I think states need to start looking within and saying, how can we work to safely reopen our states? And how have other states done it successfully if other states are behind? And we have models out there, and that's why we always say the states are the great incubators of democracy. States, we all have smart people in this country that are figuring this out. States that are reopening successfully, that aren't seeing spikes in their hospitals, have done things and used protocols, working off of guidance from the Centers for Disease Control, to successfully get their economies back open again. And no economy is back open at the level it needs to be, and that's why we need to encourage everybody to safely reopen, so that the real answer to states that have budget problems is to let them start getting their economies going again, get people back to work again, get people out having their checkups with their doctors again, and their immunizations for the children that aren't getting immunized, and the cancer treatments and the mammograms and the colonoscopies that were being skipped for months. And we're seeing studies that are coming out from very well-respected health experts that are talking about the real health danger of having shut-ins and people not getting out again. And so we've got to weigh all of this, and we've got to keep encouraging the great progress we're seeing from some of these great drug companies here in America that are working on a cure, that are finding therapies that are effective for COVID-19, with the help, by the way, of some of that trillions of dollars that we have spent here in Washington. Hopefully a vaccine, and even Dr. Fauci talking about the possibility of a vaccine being available soon. And we need to make sure that we're working to help ramp up production when that is found so that we can make it available to anyone who wants to take it. We need to be focused also on holding China accountable. We need to be focused on bringing production back to America. PPE, which was in short supply in those critical weeks after we found out China, while they were lying to the world about this disease and the WHO joining in with them, was blocking the export of PPE, which they make the lion's share of, including American companies in China that weren't even allowed to sell PPE back to us when they had orders in place to do so. And so we should be investigating that. I'm sorry that that's not happening here. We should be addressing how we can bring more of that manufacturing back to America to create new jobs for Americans, making our own protective equipment for our frontline workers like doctors and nurses. And unfortunately, that focus hasn't been there. But the real issue is, where should Congress's role be in this? Shouldn't Congress be leading the way and showing people how to safely reopen and do our work? And while we've only had a limited number of opportunities to come back here and vote directly on the House floor, it's been a smooth process. It's been a process that's been safe for members, staggered votes where social distancing, which is still the standard that everybody should be practicing, is able to be exercised in a safe and effective way. Clearly, we had a very big difference on the proxy voting, and I think we've already seen abuses of that process. But the real issue is, when are we going to get back to a functioning regular schedule for the House of Representatives? As we're watching major companies, you had Disney announce yesterday that they're going to start opening their parks again in a few weeks. You have the National Basketball Association talking about playing games again. Whether or not they're fans in the stands, you talk about a sport that can't exercise social distancing, they're working on protocols right now to test players, but to allow games to go on. And we all know the physical nature of a sport like basketball or even football, or hockey is talking about coming back. NASCAR is already racing again. As all of these things are happening, and these ideas in these great ways to safely get different parts of our economy are open again, we don't even know what the schedule of the House is, when the House will actually be back voting again, when committees, the Armed Services Committee could be in a large room in the Capitol that's sitting vacant right now, debating the National Defense Authorization Act, so that we don't get caught bringing up legislation at the midnight hour. We can actually start working on that now. That work can be done here in Washington. It doesn't have to be done remotely. But these are the concerns that we would ask: is there going to be a time when the majority leader would put out a new schedule that actually shows what our voting pattern will be? We know, obviously, when you look at May and April and even June, clearly that has changed, but at some point, will it be mid-June? Will it be July, when we're seeing so many of these? Again, if NBA players can be playing basketball in July, can't we have a regular schedule by then that the House will be conducting business? And we've seen, the Spanish flu, and people had to get here in horses and buggies, and yet they figured out how to do it. Can we lead the way again in showing people how to safely do our business with consistent schedule that right now doesn't exist? I would yield to the gentleman.
Answer is yes. As I said, we're going to have out a
Do we know when that would, if I could ask when?
In the near term. But we have to find out how our committees can operate. I want to say the National Defense Authorization Bill, on both sides of the aisle, they've been working very, very hard at distance, on the phone, in other ways. So I expect them to be ready to come to the floor this summer, and we're going to pass that bill, we think, before the summer break. That's for certain.
If I can ask the gentleman on the voting and whether it's in committee, and clearly there are rooms here in the Capitol. You've seen the Rules Committee utilize the Ways and Means Committee, where they are able to be spread out at distances well beyond the safe standards of social distancing, well beyond 6 feet, where you can have in-person hearings where the back and forth of a debate and the votes that would go with it where a proxy vote doesn't really fit that situation can occur. I would hope that we do that. But when we look at, this shouldn't have been a partisan exercise. I know early off we talked about trying to find a way to conduct our business where both parties would agree, and the minority leader and the speaker were talking about doing that, and we thought that would be how it would end up. And then, of course, that wasn't what happened with the proxy voting. But, even the gentleman you just mentioned, that if somebody proxy voted, it would be for health reasons. And yet yesterday, the first time where this new experiment that's never been done in over 230 years was conducted, there were members who voted by proxy signing a document saying that they couldn't be here to physically attend proceedings, and yet turns out they were in other places. In some cases, it took them longer to get to a rocket launch than it would have taken them to get here to the United States Capitol, in a clear violation of the intent of proxy voting. And that literally was just on the first day. And so I don't know if the gentleman's going to revisit proxy voting, but clearly we've seen most people can come here and do the work, but even some who chose not to could have been here. And what message does that send to the country when we should be the ones leading the way to safely reopen? I would yield.
I think the country is distancing itself as well. I don't know whether you drove into work today, but there are hardly any cars on the street. There are hardly any cars on the street in New York. And the reason is because people are taking the advice of the government and practicing social distancing. We think that makes sense. We think that's consistent with medical advice, and that's what we've been doing. And it's very nice to say, well, they could have been here, but there are a lot of West Coast members who have to get on airplanes. Some of those airplanes now, because there are so few flights, are very crowded, and people are concerned because they're not practicing social distancing. So, I think that we are, most of us, when I'm speaking, I don't wear a mask, but if you see me in the Capitol, you see me coming in and out of the Capitol, getting into my car, I have a mask on. I think we are setting an example. I think we're setting an example of how you distance here on this floor, which we're all practicing right now. So I think the House is setting a good example of understanding that it's not business as usual. When you walk down the street and people are wearing masks, you know it's not business as usual. You know it's not the America of 3 or 4 months ago. So in any event, I think we're going to proceed. We have provided to do the business of the American people. We did that this last 2 days, passed a number of very important bills, important bill to small business in particular. I was sorry that we didn't resolve the FISA question, but we did go to conference. We'll see what happens on that. So we have passed, as the gentleman mentioned earlier, extraordinary legislation through this House over the last 2 months to assure that the American people got the help they needed and that the economics of our country were undergirded to the extent we could. So we've done a lot of work, and I want to say this. I think we do a service to our members and to this institution if we go home and pretend that somehow members aren't working because they're not physically in this room. I don't know, I presume you're members, but I'll tell you, the members on my side of the aisle are working round the clock, communicating round the clock. And that bill that we passed in a bipartisan way, we took a lot of time, days and days and days and days of hour and hour and hour-long conversations to get to a consensus on what ought to be in that bill. And we passed it in a bipartisan way, so my presumption is you did the same. I don't know, I wasn't on your phone calls. But you do a disservice, I think. I don't mean you personally, but we do a disservice to allow the president or anybody else. Nobody's on vacation. People are working harder now than if we didn't have this coronavirus. It's been my observation. So I am hopeful that we will move on. I'm hopeful that we will be back to business as usual as soon as possible. Possible is the operative word. with the advice of our Capitol physician, with the advice of the administration, my own governor. You talked about states. I have a Republican governor, Governor Hogan, whose father was one of my predecessors. And I know he is still very cautious and urging caution of our citizens. Unless the gentleman has something further, I'm prepared to yield back the time.
I would just say that, clearly we have a disagreement on how business should be conducted on the House floor, specifically as it relates to proxy voting and whether or not we can be here physically doing the job. And clearly when we're at home in our districts, we're finding other ways to get work done, to communicate with constituents, to communicate with people all around the nation. And, using technology, it's definitely helped the ability for us to do it, but it's not the same thing as when we're here. And the other side of that, because one piece of it is the ability to be here, and clearly we have the ability to be here. There are flights, if somebody's not comfortable flying, they used to take horse and buggy. They didn't have planes, and yet they found a way to get here in tougher times. But then you look at the message that we're trying to send, and yes, there are some places that you don't have traffic on the road because their officials have chosen not to open as aggressively as others, using safety protocols. No one is talking about compromising safety, but there are many states that have shown how to safely reopen on a much wider scale, where you can get people back out doing the things that they want to do again. And that's the real issue, is that you're watching aspects of the private sector. You're even watching other levels of government, large cities, large states that are reopening and doing it successfully, not overrunning their hospitals. Most of our hospitals are telling us they want more patients. They want the people that normally would be getting their checkups and immunizations and even hip replacements and things that are part of their life cycle of their quality of life and their ability to live with cancer treatments and things like that that aren't being done. There are people dying right now because they're not being tended to. In my home parish, I actually talked to my coroner about this. He took a 6-week period, just 2 weeks ago, take a 6-week period and take that exact 6-week period a year ago. And there was a 42% increase in non-COVID related deaths just in my home parish. This year, more, 42% increase, because people aren't going out, weren't going to the doctor. If they had chest pains, they weren't going to a doctor because the doctor's office is closed where they could catch it, and so they were dying in their house. These are real numbers from the coroner. I mean, there is a problem that's created by not allowing people to go about their lives again in a safe way. And so we ought to be leading the way to show people how to do it. And again, we've had votes here on the House floor before proxy voting in the midst of this pandemic, and it went very smoothly. And if there's better ways we can find to do it, we'll do it. But we followed all the protocols of the attending physician. I didn't hear of any members complaining about that process. Everybody went about it their own way, practicing the social distancing that we all encourage. And yet, we're not doing that on a consistent basis, and that doesn't send the right message. And so as the gentleman reworks the schedule, I hope it's done soon, but I hope it takes into account the fact that it is important for us to show the rest of the country that we can be here doing our job. Yes, there are things that we're going to do remotely. There are things we always do remotely. If we're on a 3-week schedule in D.C. and 1 week back home in our districts, it's important that we go back home to stay in touch with the people who actually elect us, the people that make this country work, so that we can come back here and represent them better. But we do have to come back here and do the work. You can't phone it in sometimes. You can't do that remotely. There are certain parts of our job where we actually have to be here. In the rough and tumble of a legislative process, things change on the fly. And if you're back home or going to some other event somewhere else because you choose not to come here, it's kind of hard to say you gave your proxy to somebody and then things change 2 minutes before a vote. It's going to be hard for that person to know how to change their vote by proxy when they're not here. And so there are flaws in that don't need to be there because we've proven we can be here. And I just hope that that's taken into account when the new schedule is being worked out, and again, hopefully released as soon as possible, so that as other people and industries and groups are starting to show how they're going to come back safely, we can do the same thing. Not last. Clearly, we're not going to be first now, but hopefully, as other people are making those decisions, we can be part of that, not at the tail end of it. And I would yield.
I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.